Welcome to Wicked Felina. I'm Felina. Now, I'm not too happy with the royal family. As you can see, I kind of like the Sylvaners. But our family's a bunch of hypocrites, aren't they? No, they're not supposed to get involved in politics. But this isn't really politics. The Queen is supposed to be head of the church, and she sets a huge example for Christ, right? And her subjects are being mistreated, and the law is being misapplied, applied to some and not to others. And the British people, actual British citizens, are being thrown in jail, are being dragged through the courts, are being raped. And they say the Queen doesn't really have any power, but the truth is, yes, she does have power because she's closed down parliaments in Canada and all over. If they don't run things the way she wants them to be run. And apparently, so she does have a lot of power, doesn't she? Now, recently there was a big smackin' royal wedding. And I hear that the security alone, because God knows you don't want any terrorist attacks. We don't want anything happening to the royal family. Definitely not. So $30 million, I hear. And before the wedding, they cleaned the streets up. They got rid of all the homeless people and took away all their possessions. You know, there was a time in England where they were getting rid of the undesirables, people of the lower classes. Well, anything you did wrong, they hung you. You steal a piece of bread, you were hung. And the wealthy people used to have these chambers in their homes with this big iron cover. And in that, at the bottom, were spikes. And if they didn't like someone, one of their servants just was not acting the way they wanted them to act, they would throw them in there and they would die slowly on these spikes. And they put the cover over so they wouldn't hear their screams. So that's how they got rid of undesirables in England. And it seems to be that England is kind of going back in time. There was one time they did an archaeological excavation of this well. And there were hundreds of people thrown down that well upside down, including children. And it turns out to be that they were all Jewish, because there was a time in England, and actually today, because I had family lived in England. Let me tell you, they're not very nice to Jewish people to this day. That kind of, well, anyway. And there was a time in England that they got rid of all the Jewish people. So England has a history of getting rid of undesirables, like Count Dankula. Count Dankula, who trained his little girlfriend's pug to raise his paw about 3 or 4 inches from the floor, which means, as far as a meaning to that goes, absolutely nothing. It didn't look like anything. And then he spliced in a picture of Hitler. If poor Mel Brooks, and he's Jewish too, if he went over to England, they would have just killed him, wouldn't they? Just this poor man, how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars it cost him. And he was just a poor man. Dragged him to the courts. Well, he didn't get thrown in jail. God forbid you have anybody that's trying to shed light on wrong and the mistreatment of people. Now, I'm very sensitive to these grooming gangs that they used girls in foster homes, that they would prostitute them out for 40 years. And the royal family, good friend of the royal family was Jimmy Savile. He's a pedophile. And I guess there's a lot of pedophiles in Parliament too. So maybe England is kind of pro-pedophile. That could be it. Isn't really that is anything to do with we don't like you because you're poor. It's just that we're really pro-pet. Then that still wouldn't explain Count Dankula, actually. And there was that imam recently who was having sex with all these young girls, basically pedophilia, and they didn't want to throw him in jail because the wife couldn't speak English, which is very interesting because Cameron, a while back, when they heard about that there were some Muslim women that were getting beaten, and it does say that in the Quran, it's their right to do it. We have no right to complain. It's an order by Muhammad. But he said that it would be a good idea that these women learn English. That way they could report. As it turns out, they called that Islamophobic, to have these women speak English so they can report on getting beaten or mistreated. So for the sake of not wanting to be Islamophobic, this imam will never go to jail because his wife can't speak English, because if she did speak English, that would be Islamophobic. So this is making an awful lot of sense, and I really don't know what school I need to go to understand what's going on. So I am very sensitive to foster children. My father was, and he was shoved in and out of many foster homes after living a life of complete and total poverty. His mother moved out of the country altogether and just put them in foster homes. And, foster parents, they shoved, he lived in the basement. They shoved as many beds as they could in the basement because foster parents get money for every child I have. So I assume that these foster parents were prostituting these little girls out, and they were getting an awful lot of money for it. Now, I hope they're in jail. I hope somebody's in jail. But I suppose they said that they wanted these men who have been raping these girls to have a fair trial, and they didn't want anybody reporting on them. Tommy Robinson, he was warned, one more infraction, he'd get thrown in jail. But he didn't realize that just reporting on what's going on in these trials, so England knows what's going on. They're embarrassed for the fact that they didn't do anything about this for 40 years. And, I understand that the royalty is not supposed to get involved in politics. But she will shut down Parliament. When they're not doing what she wants them to do. So in a way, that is political. She's the head of the church, so she's supposed to be like the Pope and supposed to be Christ-like. And I don't think Christ would like what's going on in England. I think he would speak out against these girls getting raped and pedophiles getting away. You see, if you let one of these little ones astray, it would be better if a millstone was tied around your neck and you'd be thrown in the middle of the ocean. So something like Jesus said, there's nothing greater in heaven than if you could become like a little child, So just the fact that this is going on, and the Queen basically represents Christ on earth, because she's supposed to be like the Pope. And you think that this would break her into pieces, knowing what's been going on to her subjects should be her like her children, right? And shouldn't she want to save and protect her children? It's not politics. That's, if she's the best and she's taken on this job, it isn't about going around shaking people's hands, wearing pretty outfits, or launching ships by cracking a bottle on the side of it. That isn't really, is that what your job is? And having hundreds of people come to Buckingham Palace and serving them on gold plates and gold chairs. Is that your job? Because if your job is holy, then you are like Christ, and you should take care of your subjects, which are like your children, you know. And if the children are being harmed, you have every right. And I'm telling you, because I self-identify as the empress of the entire universe. I mean, since people can self-identify, I am, and there's only one, there will never be another one of me. I am the empress of the whole universe. And this is how things are run. Okay. This is how the new universe is run. And if there are any other universes we don't know about, I'm empress of all of them too. You know, there's no emperor, there's just me. I don't do miracles because I'm not God, and I shall not claim to be God. But I believe you should be Christ-like. That's your job, is to be Christ-like. Now, it's very interesting that going back, you've got this royal wedding, and you've got your security for £30 million, and then the cake costs $67,000 in US money. Was it $37,000 or pounds? Right. You know, I've made wedding cakes, for God's sakes, and I would love to have gotten that money for my cakes. And then you clean up the streets from the undesirables. And everybody's all happy because he's marrying technically a commoner that's really his cousin. And it's really interesting because a month before he got engaged, let's see, this guy here, right? This guy who we all loved, and we just couldn't wait for him to be king. You know, we want the queen to live forever. In fact, I want the queen to live forever, definitely. And we really wanted him to be next because, you know, Charles gets on the thing and talks about the whole wild places and how we need to keep the world wild. You know, they own 20% of the world, of the best real estate in the world. And they've got a lot of real estate that they can keep wild if they want, okay? They don't have to be asking us for this. And his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, said that he wants to come back as a disease and kill off most of the population of the world. That doesn't sound Nazi at all. Absolutely not. And then we hear, a month before Harry gets engaged, this guy, this wonderful guy, says that the population of the earth is too high. You know, because he's going to be king, and there's just too many undesirables in the world that are they're filling up space. We're using up resources. And, you know, you got to depopulate the world. All of you shouldn't exist. And we're going to start with Africa. And, you know, remember he got engaged to her on some of the best real estate in the world, their real estate in Africa. And he gave to her Diana's ring. I do have a copy of that ring too, by the way. And so I suppose they like the scenery, they like the animals running through, and they like to see the boas, you know, wrapping around a wildebeest and squeezing it to death. And they enjoy that kind of stuff. And then a month later, after he says this, before we get a chance to just hate the royal family for not liking Black people, African people, Harry gets engaged to a biracial girl. Oh, of course they don't. They love Black people. She's biracial. You can't say that. She had all that plastic surgery. And so she looks very Caucasian now. And so, but as it turns out, she's his cousin anyway. So she's just not any African girl. She's actually his cousin on the father's side, who they really didn't want at the wedding because he's just one of those undesirable blokes, like Count Dankula. So, and then that's right, the grandfather said he wants to come as a disease, and remember that film of him? Did you see that film with him and his brother-in-law and sister, and they're marching in the Nazi parade, and he's in the Nazi parade, and then the Queen and her sister and mother, and they're all doing the Nazi salute.
Shot in 1933, playing up for the camera, young Queen Elizabeth is seen apparently raising a Nazi salute alongside her mother and younger sister dancing around. Her uncle, the future King Edward VIII, does the same. Whether an innocent gesture done in jest, the palace is said to be scrambling to figure out how the film got out.
And we've got that. That was all on the covers of all the magazines. But we forgave the Queen because she was young. So it kind of just makes the whole Count Dankula thing just look kind of like, hey, everybody does it. Nobility means the best. They're better than we are. They are the best examples. And if they do these things, by gum, if Count Dankula does a little tiny little thing with the paw thing, you think that wouldn't count at all if the royal family does it. I mean, everybody in England should be doing it if the royal family does, and especially if they're related to Nazis. Then everybody in England should be going Heil. I mean, that's how they should say hello, for God's sakes. But the most important thing that's going on here is that, speaking of undesirables and how we're going back in time, England is actually going back in time. You know how the workhouses, they put the orphan children in and would work them to death? And, that's how they get rid of those undesirables. Or if you stole something, it was even better than hanging somebody just because they stole something. They realized they could sell the undesirables to the colonies for 5 silver coins. And that was a real bargain because African slaves were being sold for 50 silver coins. They were actually worth more than the white undesirable people of England, and they were already emaciated. I mean, they weren't worth it anyway because they were so poor. They were starving to death anyway, and so they didn't really live for very long anyway. So you really couldn't charge any more than 5 silver coins for them. So now you've got a new system. So Tommy Robinson is just moved to a new place in the prison that's where the Muslims are, the Pakistanis, the people that he's been speaking against. And, I would say within 15 hours, this guy is going to be dead. Within 15 hours, Tommy Robinson is going to be dead. So if you're hearing me in England, which I will never go visit again, my family used to live in St. John's Wood, by the way. And my uncle was at the Queen's coronation. He was Lieutenant Commander of the Royal Navy. He actually knew her, but I won't tell you the name. But anyway, get into the streets. Demand that you know the truth of what's going on in England. If this was silenced for 40 years, and poor Tommy Robinson has been speaking out against this, trying to educate the people, can you imagine what else is going on in England? You need to know the truth. And that voice is going to be silent. That voice is silenced because he's going to be dead very soon. And you demand before it happens again and to stop whatever is happening now. You know there's more going on now in England. So thank you, Tommy, for what you've done. And now, England, you have to stand up. Harry, you had a big, fancy royal wedding. And that money could have gone to the poor. Why didn't you do what your mother would have done? Your country is falling into pieces. Why don't you be the one that speaks out? Why don't you be the one that leaves the royal family? Become a politician. Do something, do anything. Beg your grandmother to change things, to speak out, to speak up. How can you have children? How can you have children of your own when there are children in your own country being raped and murdered? Doesn't every life count? Think of your mother and her example. At least what we thought she was, what we believed she was. If it was a lie, I hope it wasn't. But she set an example. Speak out, speak up for your people, for your country. Because like the Kinks song goes, there is no England anymore. There is no England anymore. How can you live in those golden palaces filled with wealth that was stolen in war, blood? All that wealth that you enjoy was paid for in blood. And now you're going back in time. And you're getting rid of the undesirables. Somebody speak up for Tommy Robinson before he dies, because he was speaking up for you. He wasn't doing it the smartest way, but in his heart, he was doing the right thing. He was the only one that was doing the right thing. It doesn't matter if you think he's smart or not, or went about it the wrong way. What he was trying to do is right. And your country is killing him. Right now, he's moved to a facility that is going to kill him. Aren't you ashamed? one little kiss. From Felina. Goodbye. Goodbye, Tommy. And thank you.
This imperial realm, the Lord your God endue you with knowledge and wisdom, with majesty and with power from on high. The Lord clothe you with the robe of righteousness and with the garment of salvation.
And receives the orb, the world under Christ's dominion, and the ring of sapphire and ruby.
Receive this orb set under the cross, and remember that the whole world is subject to the power and empire of Christ our Redeemer. Receive the royal scepter, the ensign of kingly power and justice. Receive the rod of equity and mercy. Be so merciful that you be not too remiss, so execute justice that you forget not mercy, punish the wicked, protect and cherish the just. Righteousness, that having a right faith and manifold fruits of good works, you may obtain the crown of an everlasting kingdom by the gift of him whose kingdom endureth forever. Amen.
Prince Charles, the Duke of Cornwall, has joined the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret, and has taken part in the splendid moment of his mother's crowning.
Oh, dear Queen. Oh, dear wonderful Queen. What about Charlie Gard and Alfie Evans? Those were your children too. Both of them were offered treatment that would save their lives in other countries. Except England and the European Union seemed to own everyone's children. Charlie Gard wasn't even allowed to go home and die. They weren't allowed to get treatment that would have saved their lives. Yet, they said, it would cause undue suffering for these children to be moved, but they were going to die. They're going to die. And you let the parents watch them die. At the same time, Alfie Evans was dying, and you took off his life support You had a new grandchild that was being born and taken care of and getting the best of the best care. His mother got the best care and being waited on hand and foot. While you let Alfie Evans die, and the Pope said, bring him to Italy, we'll take care of him. Do you think that dying would have been much better and somehow they would have mistreated him? And we have better health care in this country than you have, though our health care is going down. I do admit that. These are your children, dear Queen. Your country, your people are your children, and you represent Christ on earth. That's what you were anointed for. And that's why you hold all these jewels that no one else can wear but you, because you're Christ on earth, though Christ would take those jewels and throw them into the river, because they would look much more beautiful with the water flowing over them and the sunlight letting them sparkle and glisten so all can see. Look at these children. They're not worth it. But your grandson, the royal, was. His life was worth it. The mothers, the parents, Catherine and William, yes. Treat them. They are king and queen, aren't they? Definitely. But Alfie was nothing. So let him die. You should be ashamed. Anyone in England that allowed this should be ashamed. You're killing your own people, and you don't care. And I love the Queen. She keeps biscuits and dog treats in her big bag for the dogs. She feeds carrots to horses and smiles when she gives them those carrots. There's so much to love about her and to admire. And she married the only man she ever fell in love with, the only man she ever kissed. And there'll never be anyone like her again. But she has to stand up because she must be Christ-like and do what Christ would have done, because she represents Christ on earth, being head of the church and having the privilege of wearing all those jewels and crowns. That's why you are. And you're letting your people die. There is no England anymore. There is no England.